going to start, for those of you who are on, we're going to start promptly at 2 o'clock. So we'll need to be aware of that. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our training session for ABA Day in Washington 2025. It is great to see everyone with us today. We are excited about our ABA Day in Washington 2025. For those of you that I do not know, I am Gene Vance, and I am an attorney practicing in Lexington, Kentucky, and I have the privilege this year of serving as chair of ABA Day in Washington. And the purpose of this call is to prepare you for our visit to Washington, D.C. in just a little under 2 weeks at this point. We're going to be providing you with some basic background information. We're going to provide you with some information about the events that we have scheduled for you. And we're going to provide you with information about the issues on which we are going to lobby this year, both in person and through our digital ABA Day program. So the way this is going to work today, we're going to give you some briefing information, and then we're going to have opportunities for you to ask questions and answers of our legislative lobbyists, the issue specialists that we have on each of these ABA Day issues. And we're going to break that into 2 parts. You have an agenda that was sent to you just a short time ago. If you haven't looked in your email, look in your email, because you will have the agenda. And I apologize that was not sent to you earlier, but you do have it now, and you can follow along with what we're planning to do in terms of the training session here today. Before we start with the formal agenda that we have, I do want to say just a few things about the environment in which we find ourselves going into ABA Day 2025. This is going to be a challenging environment, I think. And I think that you will find some difficulties potentially in the offices that you visit, depending upon circumstances. You may have questions asked of you about what the ABA is doing in this time and what we've been doing with respect to some of the things that are coming out of the administration, some of the executive orders, some of the litigation. We're going to provide you with some FAQs, not as a part of this training, but we will have some information available to you to look at those issues as you go forward into the meetings on Capitol Hill in 2 weeks. But one thing that is absolutely ironclad about the ABA's commitment is our commitment to the rule of law, our commitment to access to justice, and our commitment to the independence of our judiciary. Those issues will be touched upon in the matters that we are lobbying on this year. All of the issues that we are lobbying on in person are issues that are Keller appropriate. For those of you who are in mandatory bar states, these are issues on which it is safe and appropriate for you to lobby with respect to your mandatory bar status, because we're going to be talking about issues that are directly relevant to access to justice and to our judicial system. That said, you may get questions, and we're going to try to help you if you do get questions from either members of Congress or their staff about other issues on which the ABA is active at this point in time. But what I want all of us to understand is that we are the American Bar Association. We are the national voice for lawyers, and we're going to be carrying that voice forward on Capitol Hill just as we have for the past 28 years at this point. So ABA Day in Washington is going to be our time, in the words of President Bill Bay, our time to convey our message on the issues that we believe are fundamental and are important. And it is because of all of you, you state captains, you planning committee members, you attendees at ABA Day, that we are going to be successful in carrying that message forward in Washington. And I thank you very much for your willingness to do that. So with that said, let's move on to our agenda that we want to cover today. The first thing that I am going to talk to you about is our schedule for ABA Day. It's going to work pretty similarly to what we have been doing in person. And I want to just convey to you some of the highlights. Now, this schedule is available to you on the ABA Day in Washington website. And if you are like me, the easiest way to find the ABA Day in Washington website is simply to Google ABA Day in Washington, and you'll get right there. And you will find all of the information that you need with respect to ABA Day. But the schedule will start on Tuesday, April the 8th, with our registration, which opens at 3:30 p.m. at the Holiday Inn Capitol Hill. Registration will run until 5:30 that day. If you don't get to the hotel or get into Washington by 5:30, you can pick up your registration materials the following morning at the breakfast. But if you're in town on Tuesday, you can pick up your registration materials, the packets that you will use for your in-person visits on the Hill, and all of the other material that you'll need at the registration desk in the lobby of the Holiday Inn Capitol Hill. We will be having, and this is an incentive for you to come in time, a welcome reception at the Holiday Inn on Tuesday afternoon from 5 to 6:30. So please join us. It'll just be a light reception to get everybody ready to go, making those connections, making those acquaintances, renewing acquaintances, and generally getting ready for our day on Capitol Hill the next 2 days. We'll then start with our breakfast on Wednesday morning, April the 9th. Breakfast will be available starting at 7:30. For those of you who have been in the last several years, you know that's a breakfast buffet. So please come. Breakfast will be available starting at 7:30. We'll begin the program at 7:45 or thereabouts. But we have guest speakers coming to talk with us at the breakfast on Wednesday morning, and we're going to be presenting awards. We will be presenting our Grassroots Awards, and we will be presenting our Justice Awards. The Justice Awards this year will be presented to 2 members of Congress who have been particularly helpful to the ABA in our advocacy efforts and our issues on the Hill over the past year. We're going to be presenting those awards to Representative Suzanne Bonamici from Oregon and Representative Claudia Tenney from New York. And both Representatives Bonamici and Tenney will be present in person to accept their awards. And then we're also going to be presenting our Justice Awards, and one that they're both incredible award recipients. Particularly, I would call your attention to the award we're presenting to recently retired Chief Justice Nathan Hecht from the Texas Supreme Court, who has just been an amazing advocate for access to justice throughout the country in many different respects, and a real advocate for access to justice, particularly in his home state of Texas. And our Young Lawyers Division Disaster Legal Services Director will be receiving a Grassroots Award as well for incredible work in that area. So you want to be in your seats and ready for breakfast for our program. We'll also give you our charge from President Bay to head to the Hill and to lobby and cover any other details that may be important for us to share with you that Wednesday morning at our breakfast. I want to let you know that our headquarters on the Hill for Wednesday is going to be in a slightly different location. We will be in the Capitol Visitor Center. So for those of you who have been to the Capitol Visitor Center, you know that it's actually underground underneath the Capitol building. We will be on the House side of the Visitor Center in HVC 200, House Visitor Center 200. And one important note for you about the headquarters on the Hill this year, because we're going to be in the Visitor Center, that means you will not be in one of the office buildings on the secure side. So if you have an appointment that you need to leave for, you need to allow extra time to be able to get through the building security of whichever of the buildings you're going to. We're usually in the Rayburn building, and we will be in the Rayburn building on Thursday. But on Wednesday, we will be in the Capitol Visitor Center, so you want to build in that extra time to get to your appointments. Also of note, for those of you who, like me, never miss a meal, the box lunches will be available beginning at 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday in the House, in the Visitor Center on the House side. So keep that in mind. We have a really special treat for our reception on Wednesday. That is going to be at the United States Botanic Garden. This is the first time we have had this reception at the Botanic Garden. It promises to be a very, very special event, something that you're not going to want to miss. So that will start at 6 p.m. And actually, the doors open at 6 p.m. This is a Botanic Garden rule. We're not able to get in any earlier than 6 p.m. So make sure that you're there and ready to come through and enjoy. And that will be running from 6 to 7:30 on Wednesday, April 9th. Then turning to our breakfast on Thursday, April 10th, we are returning to having a substantive breakfast on Capitol Hill on Thursday. So our breakfast will begin at 7:45, and we need everyone to be in your seats in the Rayburn building promptly. We will be in the rooms 2044 and 2045 in the Rayburn building, and we'll be serving a hot breakfast. And please allow time to get through security, but we do need you to be there promptly at 7:45 because we have, again, 2 speakers, and the program is going to begin promptly at 8 a.m. Our first speaker will be Senator Chuck Grassley, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Senator Grassley will be there at 8 o'clock and ready to go. So we need to be in our seats and ready to listen to the remarks that Senator Grassley will have to share with us. Following Senator Grassley's presentation, we will then hear from Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, who is also a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And we are very much looking forward to having both Senators Grassley and Hirono there to speak with us about issues that are of particular importance to the ABA, to the ABA. Our headquarters on the Hill on Thursday will be in the Rayburn building in the same rooms where we are having breakfast. So on Thursday, you will be within the security perimeter of the House office buildings, which will make it a little bit easier for you to get to your appointments on the House side on that day. That is the schedule that we have planned for everyone for ABA Day in Washington. We think that it is going to be an outstanding lineup of events this year. So again, just taking a check on our agenda, we are now going to move to the briefings on our legislative issues. And we have 2 sets of issues. We have our issues that we're going to be talking about in person during ABA Day in Washington, and then we have our digital issues that we'll be talking about through our digital programs and offerings that we have as well as part of ABA Day in Washington. So what I am now going to do is turn the program over to our subject matter experts on these topics to provide you with a briefing. And we're first going to talk about legal services funding. And let me just remind you that when we finish the briefing from Michael O'Neill and from Denny Cardman, we'll take questions and then we'll move on to the digital issue briefing. So with that, let me turn it over to ABA Legislative Counsel Michael O'Neill, who is going to talk with us about Legal Services Corporation funding. Michael.
Hey, thank you so much, Gene. Just 2 items to note regarding the being on time for Senator Grassley. He might be 92. He still wakes up at 5 every morning and runs 3 miles, and he expects everybody to keep at his pace. So he's always starts on time. The other tip, if you are particularly friendly with somebody with a certain office, they can actually escort you down, and there's like this little subway system, and get you a little faster between the House and Senate side, depending on where you have meetings. So I just wanted to, for those practical tips. Regarding the funding for the Legal Services Corporation, this is going to be quite the challenge this year. Certainly, I would imagine in most ABA members' living memory. I won't belabor you. Everybody has heard of Doge, and that we're the administration and Congress has a real appetite to not just reduce spending, but to axe departments. So, unlike in previous years, it is important. I would just stress that the protect the program is actually the fundamental concern before even just getting to the funding question. Regarding the funding, it has been flatlined since 2024, which was actually a win back then because many other agencies received a cut. LSC's most recent ask is for 1.5 billion. The ABA has not taken a position on that. Typically, we've always said robust funding, but we've included a caveat that we understand that lawmakers face tough, choices when it comes to where to allocate, taxpayer dollars. That's going to be especially important this year. And while Democrats, at most offices, you'll receive no pushback. The pushback, of course, will come from right-leaning offices and those Republicans. What I would emphasize and lead with is that they should consider this as a tool or an extension, almost LSC, as a constituent service, which is what their district staff often provides. So whether it's for veterans, or the elderly looking to receive their benefits, that you should lean into the practical end. But then also, so why though is this a federal issue? Why does it still deserve our attention? Why is it still crucial? And here, whether you agree with it or not personally, a sympathetic argument, and one of which Justice Gorsuch recently even wrote a book about last August, is that the federal or just laws in general and regulations have become so complex that it's impossible, even sometimes for attorneys, to truly figure out what they are. And that people really need, especially low income Americans, especially those veterans and those seniors, they need somebody and an advocate, and LSC provides that. And if you receive pushback regarding, why is it a federal matter? Why shouldn't the states do it? Then again, whether you agree with it or not, you can also claim, and again, I can share in more detail because I know time is limited here, some of these stats, but that there are so many federal mandates that bleed over into state and municipal laws that so if the federal government was the one that's who created the problem, until they actually resolve it, they have a duty to help people deal with it. And right now, that is LSC provides just a phenomenal tool. So again, this is kind of off the beaten path over what we've traditionally done over the last several years, but those are more sympathetic arguments that I would recommend, and that have been good for fertile ground. Let's just say, but you do expect pushback in a hostile crowd. I do have to say that, but again, I would stress those points, and can provide again more details in the materials we're all going to send you on the various issues.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. Again, if you have questions about Legal Services Corporation funding, hold those. We're going to come to those after we cover the other three in-person issues. And by the way, just a reminder, as we're going to try to do this with people raising their hands, it's a little more orderly that way. So if you look for the react button in the middle at the bottom, you'll find an option there. Click on that. You'll see a raise hand option. So when we get to questions, if you can please navigate to that point, that would be great. So now I'm going to go back to Michael and ask him to talk about artificial intelligence and how we are going to be approaching artificial intelligence with respect to ABA Day. And I would note that we don't have a specific ask on ABA Day or ask on artificial intelligence, but it is nevertheless a topic that we want to raise kind of as a placeholder. And Michael can talk about that.
Yeah, this is a quasi-education / I would say there is an important ask contained within it, but it's important to look. We all know that artificial intelligence has now affected and impacted every single industry under the sun, and that includes the legal industry, but it rarely gets any attention, at least by federal lawmakers. And despite everything that's going on, there's still a real appetite to engage on this. Former Senate Majority Leader Schumer created that AI task force. Current Senate Majority Leader Thune, he has always been interested. I've had conversations with him personally. The House Energy and Commerce Committee, both the chairman and vice chairman, so it's a bipartisan effort, just created data privacy task force. AI and privacy just overlap considerably. Lawmakers are very confused about, because again, it just touches on so many aspects of life. But one thing that you can say, so offer yourself as a resource, which we've done. We've actually provided then Senate Majority Leader Schumer with incredible recommendations that he was extraordinarily appreciative of. We've done that for numerous offices on both the House and Senate as well. And we're clear that it might not be the ABA a policy, but that they have access to us, to our members, as a resource. So I would stress that. But the one, if we have an advocacy ask, is that, and again, I can send you actual examples of this to make it more clear, that any AI or data privacy legislation, or if they end up combining them, that they don't inadvertently undermine the attorney-client privilege or the work product doctrine, et cetera, which has happened several times in the past. This began with actually what kind of sparked all of this anyway, when 2018, with the California Consumer Privacy Act, that allowed any person from a household to request any information on anybody from that household, from a business, which just completely, got rid of the privilege. And that was quickly corrected, but it just shows how lawmakers aren't always thinking about this. Similarly, many of the people that are on the federal level, when it comes to AI, there's it's well-meaning that businesses hand over data to see how essentially this AI arrived at a certain conclusion without putting any guardrails on. And lawmakers are very cognizant of this when it comes to the medical community, but they've been less clear about that when it comes to the legal profession. So you can just mention that to them. Again, I can send you examples of like precisely how this kind of works to make it more clear. But I think that is actually very bipartisan. No, I've never walked into an office and raised that issue and somebody was like, "That's ridiculous." It's actually quite, it's well received. So that's what I would say, where we can put on a friendly face, so to speak. And I'm sorry to rush, Gene. I just know, again, that time is.
Oh, no, it's fine. Take as much time as you need. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I'm happy for the Q&A, and I'm happy to then turn it over to the fearless leader, Denny, for her issue.
All right. Let me just add also, you can put your questions in the chat. I see that we already have one, and I'll ask that question when we get to Q&A. We have one about handouts, and I think that was answered, that our handouts are going to be available next week. So let me turn it over to Denny Cardman to talk about the Judges Act. And you're muted. You're muted.
It's my modus operandi, I'm afraid. I don't know if I'm ever going to remember to unmute. Thank you very much. I've got two issues related to the judiciary that I'm going to briefly talk about. I also will have one-pagers posted that will amplify on what I'm about to say. Both of my issues are really pretty straightforward, however. The first one is that the federal courts need more authorized judgeships. And the reason for that is really very simple. The growing caseloads have created monumental delays these days, and they keep going up. Over the past 20 years, the number of civil cases pending more than 3 years rose 346%. And it is incremental, but every year it just keeps going up and up. The Judicial Conference of the United States makes a judgeship recommendation every 2 years. It is submitted to Congress. This year, their recommendation is for 2 new judgeships for the courts of appeal. Both of those happen to be in the Ninth Circuit, and 69 new district court judgeships. I will have for you a sheet that looks like this, which demonstrates or tells you exactly where those new judgeships are being requested, because obviously for those of you who are going into a member's office in one of the states where the judgeships are being recommended, you want to definitely point this out. And you'd want to point it out not only to the Senate, which obviously does the confirming of judges, but to the House also, because in a lot of states, the House creates, members of the House create nominating commissions which provide the names of individuals for consideration to be nominated for judgeships. So even though most of the activity occurs in the Senate, many members of the House are also involved in the initial process. So in terms of authorizing judgeships and the fact that it's grown 346%, we do have this recommendation, as I've explained to you. And the recommendation is for 69 new district judgeships and 2 appellate court judgeships. Sometimes we have gotten questions about how the judgeship recommendation is developed by the Judicial Conference, and there has been some pushback that it is they want more judgeships than are absolutely necessary. It is a very, very complex process that, and there are several levels of review and careful consideration that go into the consideration of what kind of recommendation should occur. Surveys are conducted every 2 years. Workload factors are considered. The judges in each district and circuit are consulted to see what they think. It's a very, very complex process. In fiscal year 2024, the weighted filings, which means they account for the difficulty of the case, went above 2,500 per judgeship in 20 out of the 25 district courts where they're asking for new district court judges. That would mean hearing more than 1 case a day, hearing and resolving more than 1 case a day. I mean, that is a pretty tough schedule to maintain. So the solution, well, obviously the problem is all of this causes tremendous delays. Delays increase expense, delays increase a lack of faith in the ability of the judiciary to resolve problems in a timely fashion. And so obviously the solution is that we need to do 2 things. We need to fill existing vacancies, and there are 45 vacancies right now, and they need to authorize new district court and circuit court judgeships where a tremendous need has been demonstrated. What your ask is to tell members of Congress that we need to urge the administration to nominate individuals, and we need the Senate to schedule time to deliberate and vote on each nominee expeditiously. At this point, there have been no nominations submitted. So it is there's a dual problem. We need nominations, and then we need the Senate to act. The other component here is that we need Congress to pass legislation to authorize additional district and circuit court judgeships where the Judicial Conference has determined that there is a need based on rising caseloads and based on the complexity of the cases, because that's another aspect of why these cases are taking so long. So that pretty much for me covers the need for more authorized judgeships. Let me take 1 sip of water, and then I will move on to the next subject. The next issue has to do with making sure our judges are safe. And that's the way we preserve our independent and impartial courts, is to make sure that judges have the opportunity, without fear or favor, to render a judgment that may not be popular with society or certain individuals. As we often say, it's a bedrock principle of our Constitution that we need a fair and impartial judiciary where judges can issue decisions based on the facts without fear of reprisal or physical harm. The truth is, every day, whether it's state or federal, and we're talking now state, we're talking about state courts now. State judicial officers and staff deal with terribly wrenching cases and difficulties that people face. And while many individuals accept the decisions of the court, there are some cases where disgruntled, angry litigants threaten and even try to physically harm the judges and their families. Now, while the U.S. Marshal Service monitors and develops best practices to handle threats against federal judges, we don't have that kind of component on the state side. And there is a need for it. So there has been legislation introduced last Congress. It was called Countering Threats and Attacks on Our Judges. And what it did was it established within the existing State Justice Institute a resource center that would collect and assess data on the nature and extent of the threats and develop best practices that can be adapted, implemented by state courts nationwide. We have this on the federal side. It was called the Daniel Anderl Judicial Security Act. We don't have a counterpart to that on the state side. If we don't have the data to know what's going on, we can't come up with a solution. So this is simply, we need to collect the data to know the extent of the problem, to know where it's happening, how it's happening, so that we can develop solutions. So that is, I think that I could tell you what the State Judicial Threat and Intelligence Resource Center would do also. I think I'll just mention a few of its functions. It would provide education and training. It would develop over time resource guides on best practices for judicial security. And I think most important, it would provide physical security assessments for homes, courts, and other facilities where judicial business is conducted. Sometimes in certain areas in the states, they will use regular office buildings and have 2 or 3 rooms that will be designated as hearing rooms. So we're not just talking about courts, we're talking about wherever judges hold conferences and hold court. We need a standard incident reporting practices. Again, we need these tools so we can assess how big the threat is and we can figure out how best to handle it. And I see a hand up. Did you want to do the questions now, Jean, or wait until the end? I apologize.
Let's just keep going. We'll get the questions after we get the briefing.
Okay. So basically, here's the ask. While threats of violence against state judges are reported by our court offices, and they're reported to the public basically through local media outlets, there's no national database to collect, quantify, and assess how bad the threats are. Therefore, what we're asking is that Congress pass legislation to establish a state judicial threat, intelligence, and resource center. You could just say establish legislation to establish a center within the existing State Justice Institute to improve the quality of justice in all state courts by better facilitating coordination between the states and collecting necessary data. I think that pretty much covers what I want to say about this state judicial threat and intelligence resource center. As I've said, I know that is a mouthful, and I promise you there will be a one-pager that breaks this down and will be available. I think, Holly, you said Monday, correct? We'll have everything up by Monday, if not earlier.
And that's for everybody. Just as a reminder, right. These issue papers people keep mentioning, and Eric put into the chat that it'll be posted on Monday. Every one of the issues that you're hearing about today from Denny, Michael, Larson, Ken, each one of them has one issue paper. It'll identify the problem, the solution, and the clear ask. We're explaining, we're here to answer questions today. We're also going to be posting all of that information by this Monday. So please go online to look for them. Sorry for that interruption. Jean.
I have one more thing I'd like to add, Jean, in terms of threats to state judges. One of the things you could do proactively would be to call your state court administrator and find out if there are what has happened in your state courts. There may be examples you can use. They may have statistics. Obviously, every time you can personalize it, bring it home, let your member of Congress know it's happening in his or her district or circuit. It makes the message stronger, more poignant, and it's just more powerful. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Denny. I want to add just something on the Judges Act, because that is an area where, in particular, we are like we're aligned. We're not really aligned with anyone. But the legislation that is currently moving is legislation that is sponsored by the majority party in the House. And this will be in the one-pagers that you have. But there are two bills. And for your reference, the Judges Act passed both houses of Congress in the last Congress. It did not pass the House until after the November election. Unfortunately, and the ABA sent a letter urging President Biden to sign the legislation. Unfortunately, he vetoed it because I think in his veto message, he said that it wasn't passed by the House until after the November election. From the ABA's standpoint, we don't care who sponsors the bill. We don't care when it is passed. We believe we need more judges, clearly. And the AOC believes, Administrative Office believes that we need more judges. There is not a bipartisan piece of legislation right now. There are competing bills. And the difference between the two bills largely is in terms of timing. From our standpoint, and again, this is going to be in the one-pager, the sooner the better. Both of the construct of both of these pieces of legislation is that the judges are staggered over multiple presidential terms.
10 years.
Over 10 years or more in some instances. And depending upon which bill you're looking at. And the principal disagreement between the two parties right now is whether we should start that first tranche of judges in the current presidential term or in the next presidential term. The legislation that was passed last year was intended to be passed so that it would start in this presidential term, no matter who won the election. And where it got thrown off track is the fact that it wasn't passed until after the election. From the ABA's standpoint, this whole idea of the parties going back and forth saying, no, you go first, no, you go first, no, we won't let you have appointments, no, we won't let you have appointments, is the whole reason we haven't added judges since 2003. And so we need to add judges. And that is the message that we are going to be delivering when we're on Capitol Hill. And that's going to be in your one-pager when you get it. Now, what we're going to do is go to questions on these first two topics, that is, or first three topics, rather, the Legal Services Corporation, artificial intelligence, the Judges Act, and the judicial security piece. They're four different issues, but we're going to go to questions on those. I'll first note that there was a question in the chat about the economic impact of legal services funding. Resources have been placed in the chat that I think will answer that question. But if there are other questions about the economic impact of legal services funding, by all means, raise them. As a reminder, you can either raise your hand to ask a question, or you can put a question in the chat. We have one person with their hand raised, so I'm going to go to Dan Cotter with your question. Dan, please go ahead.
Thanks. And a couple questions. One is on the state judge security, and the first is on the Judges Act, which I'm in favor of. And as you know, I have written about Biden vetoing it. But my question is this on that act, and I'm struggling with, honestly, is all this talk, are we going to get blowback because or pushback because one of the things that Mike Johnson and others in the Congress right now are talking about in the GOP is shutting down certain judges that don't rule in favor of the Trump administration, this whole issue of national injunctions. And
Right.
so we're talking about they're overwhelmed.
Right.
And yet we have this whole tension where Congress is saying these dirty, evil judges that are corrupt are not doing the right thing, which seems counter to expanding the court right now. That's my first question. And then on the state thing, it's a similar issue because there's reports that federal judges are getting Domino's pizzas delivered to them that rule against Amy Coney Barrett's sister is getting bomb threats. And so I guess the ask is, one of the astonishing things so far in this whole thing with the tax on law firms and stuff is that the FedSoc and the right and conservatives have been more silent than anybody, right? The ABA's come out with statements, other bars have come out with statements. I haven't seen FedSoc or any conservative judges or anybody say that this is a terrible thing. And in fact, Judge Ho resigned from the Federal Judges Association when they put out a statement about this independence and security. So again, I'm really, honestly, just between all of us, I'm struggling with kind of, we're going to ask for this kind of thing. And it seems like, where are we at on these things? Because it seems like we're on both sides of the spectrum of what's really happening versus what our ask or what our conversation is going to be on Capitol Hill.
If I just may mention.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
Michael, let Denny go ahead if you don't mind. Go ahead, Denny.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is going to be pushback. I think one of the answers in terms of creating more judgeships is that it's your constituents that are suffering. It's your constituents who don't get their day in court in a timely fashion. I mean, I think that's one of the strongest arguments you can make.
And let me also add on that point that these judgeships that are being created are in places where there is the greatest need.
Right.
Many of those judgeships are in what you would consider blue states. And so long as the blue slip process is in place for district court judgeships, and Senator Grassley has said he intends to maintain the blue slip process, which for those of you who don't know, means that the home state senators have to sign off on a nominee or the nominee will not get a vote. That's for the district court. That does not apply to circuit court nominees, but it does apply to district court nominees. And just as an example, in the set of judges in the bill that was introduced in the House, about half of actually a little more than half of the judges that would be authorized in the first year are in so-called blue states. So that's a piece of this as well. With respect to the judicial security part of it, and Denny, I don't know if you want to comment directly on that, but what I would say is there should not be a debate, partisan or otherwise, about whether judges should be kept safe and whether judges' information should be protected. That is and should be a universal issue. And I wouldn't even want to begin to try to speak for Judge Ho, but some of the information that has been where people say, well, you didn't say this about that, or you didn't say that about this, is actually not true. There have been statements made consistently about threats that have been made in many different periods of time. And I would also say that just to note that there are conservatives that are speaking out on these issues. There was an op-ed from Judge Ludig in the New York Times over the weekend, and so we are, and maybe some people wouldn't say he's a conservative now. that's a hard case to make. But in any event, I think that there is bipartisan support here. And yeah, you may get some pushback. And we have a question from President-elect Benke about that in the chat. But the bottom line is judges are there to do their job, to uphold the rule of law, to be independent in exercising their discretion and their decisions. And they deserve to be safe and secure in doing so. And that's what we're going to be talking.
And we need enough of them. So may I just add one point? Here's something that you also may hear on the Hill, and I'm trying to get an answer for you. There will be, I suspect, some concern raised that creating new judgeships is very expensive because a judge needs a chamber, judge needs a staff, needs a complete staff. And there is a definite cost associated. There was a time when I had a statistic on exactly how much that was, an estimate about how much that cost. I would like to be able to get that to you. I think the only way you can answer it is justice has no, there isn't a price tag that you can associate with delivering timely justice. It's a basic principle of our system, and we have to pony up the money if that's what's needed. That's all I wanted to add, Gene.
Michael, did you have a quick comment? Because I want to move us on.
Very, just incredibly brief. One of the reasons why this act is coming up now is actually about the impeachment question. It's to get around it. As all of you know, I'm sure Congress is looking to move fast on reconciliation. Any impeachment proceedings would drastically delay that. And so this is an attempt to assuage the president's concern. And then just regarding the impact studies related to LSC, I can tell you all of those kinds of studies fall on deaf ears in most Republicans' offices.
All right. So Bill Weisenberg, a question on one of our first four issues.
Question from Michael O'Neill quickly. Any chatter on the Hill with regard to placing any restrictions on LSC funds?
No, I think right now it's whether it gets zeroed out. They don't have time. It's what programs to cut or keep. They literally just don't have time to get into those details, whether you want to consider that a good or a bad thing. But that's why it really is important to stress the importance of preserving the program. And if I could just say, because the article came out in the American Conservative that might get brought up. It was last week. Again, I can share that. That talked about some of those ancient concerns that were addressed in the 90s. I did reconfirm with LSC that any independent dollars that go to it, in addition to the direct federal dollars, come with the same strings attached. So you can unequivocally go in there and say that.
All right. Any other questions on our first four issues before we go to our digital briefing? All right. Larson and Ken, I'm going to ask you to keep your briefing to about 2 minutes per issue on these two, because I do want to have some time for Holly's lobbying tips. So let's go to our briefing on digital ABA Day. And this is going to be, these are not issues we're going to be talking about in person, but that we'll be lobbying on digitally and through our home district visits. So let me turn it over to Larson Frisbee to talk about tax reform. Larson.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Larson Frisbee with Governmental Affairs Office, and I'm the lead lobbyist on what we're generally calling our tax fairness for law firms issue, which basically involves trying to preserve the existing tax deduction for the owners of law firms and all other so-called pass-through businesses that's set to expire later this year. As Gene noted, this is one of our secondary digital and district issues only, not one of our main issues like LSC that will be lobbied on during your actual in-person meetings during ABA Day. Just a little background, because this is a brand new issue for many of you. As many of you know, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which President Trump viewed as one of his signature accomplishments was the first major tax reform of our nation's tax system in more than 30 years. And it did a lot of things, but in addition to lowering the tax rates for corporations and for most individuals, the act also included significant tax reductions for millions of mostly small pass-through businesses, including partnerships, LLCs, and S corporations, and sole proprietorships. And these, unlike C corporations, are businesses that do not pay federal income tax directly, but instead pass their profits through to the owners of the businesses, who then report that income on their individual tax returns. So in order to reduce the taxes on those small pass-through businesses, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act created Section 199A of the Internal Revenue Code, which allows the individual owners of the pass-through businesses to deduct 20% of their qualified business income they receive from those businesses, which is based on a complex formula. But basically, the purpose of this was to make the pass-through business owners' effective marginal tax rate roughly equivalent to the taxes being paid by the larger public corporations. Although the owners of most types of pass-through businesses are eligible to receive the full deduction, the deduction unfortunately phases out for owners of law firms, accounting firms, and other so-called specified service trades or businesses, or SSTBs, whose income exceeds certain thresholds. And it goes up each year. For this year, the only owners of law firms and other SSTBs that can claim this deduction are those that file individual returns for less than $197,300 a year, or married couples that earn $394,600 a year or less. Those folks are able to claim this pass-through tax deduction. If owners of law firms or other SSTBs earn more than that, the deduction quickly phases out over $50,000 for singles and $100,000 above those thresholds I just mentioned for married couples. Unfortunately, the Section 199A deduction is set to expire on December 31st unless it's renewed by Congress, which would result in a large tax hike on millions of small businesses, including many law firm partners and solo practitioners. The other problem, as I mentioned, that we're trying to address is even if it's renewed, it unfairly phases out based on income thresholds for law firm owners and accounting firm owners, but not for other small businesses. So in order to address these two problems, we're basically encouraging Congress to, number one, permanently renew the Section 199A deduction and then apply it equally to all small business pass-throughs, including law firms and other professional service businesses. As will be explained in the one-pager that you'll be sent, shortly, and the talking points, we basically have four main arguments that we're, making to Congress on why they should permanently renew the deduction and apply it to everyone on an equal basis. First, we argue that the deduction encourages job creation and economic growth and enables pass-through businesses to compete on a more level playing field with larger corporations. Second, we explained that unless it's renewed, the deduction will expire on December 31st and will result in a large tax hike on millions of small businesses, including many law firms, and should be avoided, obviously. Third, we argue that because pass-through businesses really are the dominant type of business in the U.S. and account for over 95% of all U.S. businesses, and because pass-through businesses employ 63% of all private sector workers, pass-throughs are really critical to our economy and should be protected. And then finally, we argue that because law firms and accounting firms and other professional service businesses, provide many good-paying jobs and are an important part of local economies, there's no reason why they should be singled out and denied the full deduction that other pass-throughs receive. So in closing, our ask will be that you, and this is just for the, for the digital advocacy and for your district advocacy, that you urge your senators and representatives to pass legislation this year that would permanently renew the tax deduction for all pass-through businesses, because it'll expire on December 31 if it's not renewed. And then we're asking that it be amended to basically remove the income threshold limitation so that law firms and other professional service businesses would receive the full deduction on an equal non-discriminatory basis. And in order to help you do that, what we're in the process of doing is creating what you've seen in earlier ABA digital campaigns. We're creating a short form letter that you can personalize, either send as is or personalize, that would automatically go to your two senators and to your representative. And we also have talking points, which you can use if you have meetings before or after ABA Day in your district with your member of Congress or with staff of your member of Congress. And so that's kind of an overview of this issue. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Larson. Ken Goldsmith, could I ask you to quickly cover public service loan forgiveness, which is an issue?
I will. I'll take a deep breath and see what I can do.
Yeah.
Long story short, PSLF program is super important, but action is not imminent on the program. So it's not a head forward issue for us for ABA Day. We do know that change is coming. It's going to be part of budget reconciliation. It's at least part of the mix. So we're waiting for that final budget reconciliation bill to pass. That could come. I think some recent reports are saying the week of ABA Day, we may see votes on that final resolution. But some things I want for people to keep in mind as if you weigh in digitally or you want to have meetings back in your district, keep in mind that PSLF is a loan repayment program that exchanges debt for an unrivaled and unprecedented 10-year work requirement. That's a big issue with the Republican offices, as well as repayment. So it's not a free giveaway. And that while the program offers relief to borrowers, it's really made for community service providers who are unable to fill and keep filled highly skilled positions that resulted in a degradation of services to the public. The Republican majority is concerned about issues like the high loan limits that exist now are what's enabling schools to charge north of $70,000 a year when degrees from less expensive schools will suffice. And they're also concerned that things like PSLF might contribute to patterns of overborrowing or degree inflation. So they've been introducing proposals over the last several Congresses. Some of those proposals include such things as reducing the aggregate maximum cap to $150,000 a year, but tying how much an individual can borrow to their program. So if the national median cost of law school is $90,000 that year, that's the most that anybody could borrow towards the program. That's one idea. They're also looking at capping PSLF benefits like Obama had proposed, and one draft bill even proposed excluding doctors and lawyers. And none of this is helped by the fact that the program looks like a cash money pinata at a time they're looking for change in the cushions. So we've been meeting with staff on both chambers, both sides of the aisle. Everybody's listening. They do caution that everything is on the table, but what they don't know yet is you. So we have some really great tools for people to record their stories, as well as the talking points and resources we'll provide to you. And I'll just make sure that, again, this is a program for the employers, and we will have a bipartisan PSLF caucus launched probably not until after ABA Day, but that will be coming down the pike. You can talk about. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. Any quick questions for either Ken or Larson on these two issues? All right. I'm conscious of our time, and our ending time is approaching. I'm going to turn it to Holly Cook, who is the director of our ABA Government Affairs Office, to give you 3 quick points on lobbying, and then we will have lobbying tips available for you in other formats as we get closer in time to ABA Day. So Holly, wrap us up.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you for facilitating this call, and to all of you for joining us for ABA Day this year and for this training. Whether you're coming to DC in person, you're going to be online, or whether you're going to be in home district, we appreciate it. I'm going to make 3 quick points. And then again, as Gene said, I'm going to post the lobbying. There's a slide deck of lobbying tips just to remember. But first, I want to make sure for all of you, you've made your appointments. Please confirm them and then still be flexible. I mean, many of you have done this before, but those of you who are the first timers, welcome. Be prepared that schedules change. You're going to hurry up, you're going to wait, but be prepared and be flexible. But you should be calling to confirm them and give your, if you are the state captain, make sure you're letting the office know about how many people will be in your delegation to make sure there's enough space or to find out that there's a space limit. The main thing I wanted to mention is, as Jean mentioned earlier, it is a tough time on Capitol Hill. You may find yourselves in difficult conversations, and that's okay. Some of the questions you could be asked, what about the position on DEI? What about these attacks on judges? I'm going to be posting some brief talking points. I have not posted them yet because things continue to develop, but they'll have 2 or 3 points to help you address the issue respectfully and get back on track to where you're going and not get pulled into a deep conversation that'll derail your entire planning for your ABA Day meetings. You may hear some frustration from members of their staff about what's going on, and they'll take it out on you. Please be respectful. I think that goes without saying, but don't get into an argument and do not feel like you have to respond to every comment or concern that is raised with you. If you have to, gracefully exit from the meeting, and please let GAO know, because we'll follow up with the office later and answer any questions they have. And the last point I'll make is, if you have questions in this preparation period, if you have questions that day, please don't hesitate. Contact or touch anyone from GAO on the shoulders. I mean, we've had people in the past that'll grab me and say, Holly, I need you to come now. That's what we're there for. We're there to help. Let us know if you have questions, and then give us the reports after the fact. Again, we appreciate your help in making sure Congress hears what's important to us, and we'll post those tips after this meeting. Jean, over to you. Thank you.
Holly, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for attending. For those of you who are state captains, I'll answer Laura Farber's question in the chat. Yes, we will be sending you the list of registrants for your state so that you will know who is attending. I sent a link in the chat to the ABA Day in Washington page. You can get updates there, and we will be updating you with emails as we move closer to ABA Day in Washington. But it is now time for us to conclude this training session. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank all of you for devoting your time to these important issues, to the work of the American Bar Association in Washington. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Contact me if you have questions, contact staff if you have questions, watch your emails, and let's get ready to lobby. Thank you all very much.
Thanks all.